Today is a curiosity conversation to help you build confidence through the art of networking. And I am excited to introduce you to Larry Burns, who is the president and CEO of the Children's Foundation, a mentor, a friend, a philanthropic leader, and someone that is making an impact in our community here in Michigan and really throughout the country with his leadership and wisdom. Larry, it's an honor to sit with you anytime I do. I'm always learning something from your leadership, your advice, and I'm very appreciative of the time that you'll spend with us today. So thank you in advance for all that.
It's my pleasure. It's always fun to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to start understanding a little bit about your background and how does one choose a life of philanthropy and get into charitable organizations? How did you
Well, it's
arrive?
interesting. Back when I started, I graduated from Central Michigan University in 1978 and was looking for a job, and I was fortunate to be hired by what was then called the United Foundation. It's now the United Way. And so that was my introduction into philanthropy. And it was a great way to be mentored by CEOs and executives. And it was, in many ways, the heyday of the United Way locally and nationally. And so I was there about 7 years in 3 or 4 different positions. I was fortunate to become a manager and develop some leadership experience. The other thing that really was instrumental is I began to develop my personal brand. The CEO of United Foundation was a gentleman by the name of H. Clay Howell, and he was a very dapper dresser. So I'm 22 years old, shopping at Joseph Banks, and Clay really was my mentor on how to present yourself. And again, I was working with CEOs at age 22, so I had to make sure I presented myself as best I could. And that was really when I began to have a real interest in personal branding, particularly for your profession. So I did that for 7 years, as I indicated, but it was at a time when philanthropy and development positions weren't really something that people pursued strategically. Many of the people that were in the business were former clergy, former social workers, and that was the beginning of this professional development in philanthropy. Again, this is 79, 80, 81, 82. And so I wanted some marketing and PR experience. So one of my volunteers, a fellow by the name of Phil Meath, who was CEO of Smith Henchman and Grills, now known as the Smith Group, hired me to be director of public affairs. So I did that for 3 years. We had 7 offices across the country, headquartered in Detroit. For Detroiters, the building we were in, many people refer to it as the building with the jacks holding the windows in on 4th Street. It was all glass building with sort of jacks holding it in. So I did that, and then I was approached 3 years later by a couple other mentors, led by a gentleman by the name of David Page. I worked with David at the United Foundation. He was a senior partner in Honigman and a real philanthropic leader. He was chairman of the Children's Hospital of Michigan Board, and he asked me to join them to run a capital campaign. That step really was the next move into my philanthropic career. So United Way sort of prepared me how to deal with volunteers, deal with senior executives, be prepared, prepare agendas, document the meetings. And to this day, it's been one of the things that's been most helpful to me. The PR experience for 3 years was great for media relations. That's primarily what I did. So I learned that. So then I joined Children's Hospital of Michigan. It was the first time the hospital had ever gone out to the community in a major way. They had a board that was a premier board of community leaders. They had the Jewish community, they had the Grosse Pointe community, they had an emerging African-American community, they had some athletes on the board, and it was Also an opportunity to work with another mentor, a guy by the name of Bob Larson. Bob at the time was CEO or president of the Taubman Companies. So the Caring for Kids campaign was born. And we raised money to build a brand new building. And this ended in 1990. Then I had an opportunity to stay at Children's or look for other opportunity. I was around 30 years old. So I was fortunate that I was approached by a search firm that was doing a search for a new position in Toledo, Ohio, at the then Medical College of Ohio, to be vice president for development as well as president of their foundation. So Judy, my wife, and I decided to make that move. And I was still very much strategically building my career. I wanted to keep adding things into my sort of portfolio that would enhance my opportunity to move forward throughout my career. So we moved to Toledo. The Medical College of Ohio was relatively young. It was, at the time, a medical school, a nursing school, a school of allied health, and we owned 3 hospitals. So I remained in healthcare, but also got into education. Again, building my philanthropic background. So this was 1990. I was there 16 years. During that time, the profession really was evolving. So the jobs were paying better. The institutions or the organizations were understanding how important philanthropy was. So hospitals, universities, even high schools started having development offices. So the opportunities to create a career were exploding. Then universities started having curriculum for philanthropy.
How to raise money.
How to raise money, how to be an executive. I think originally, like Indiana University was like the first one. But now I would say there's if not hundreds, there's dozens of universities. So young people are now seeking out that career because it is a way to be involved, helping people, helping your community, making a good living, and having a great career. And the opportunities are almost endless if you're willing to move and to take on new challenges. So I was at the Medical College of Ohio for 16 years. Then I had an opportunity in 2005 to help orchestrate a major merger of the Medical College of Ohio, which then was known as the Medical University of Ohio, and the University of Toledo. So we worked very hard with the folks in Columbus, because both of these were state universities. And it was at a time when universities and colleges began to see that the high school population was going to be decreasing for a long time. And so many of them thought that, particularly small privates, that, boy, they better do something different if they want to survive. So what we did different was to combine these 2 schools and became the new University of Toledo, with a medical school, a law school, a college of business, an engineering school, a pharmacy school, and we became the 3rd largest university in Ohio, budget-wise. We owned a hospital. And so what I was asked to do, and I credit this to my willingness to take chances, to keep adding on to my portfolio. So my boss, Dr. Lloyd Jacobs, asked me to take on enrollment. And I said, Dr. Jacobs, I don't know anything about enrollment. And he said, well, either do I. He's a vascular surgeon. He said, but they're not doing very well right now. So I took that on. It was one of the best decisions I ever made for my career, because it broadened my view of what marketing and branding can do for a university or a company, but in this case, a university. And we at the University of Toledo, only being 60 miles away from Detroit, we created a very innovative plan to recruit students from Detroit. In-state tuition, that was a big one. Scholarships. And then what we needed to do is tell the community we existed. So evolving my career and my experience into marketing now, we went and affiliated with iconic brands, sort of the company you keep. And so those brands in Detroit were pretty easy to identify.
Automotive manufacturing.
The Tigers,
Okay.
the Red Wings, the Lions, and the Pistons.
Mm-hmm.
So we started advertising with them, and it was enormously successful. We had 2 or 3 years of record enrollment classes. And then we said, well, this is working. So it's a combination of paying for assets and then leveraging those assets to grow your business. In our case, growing our business was recruiting more students. At a university or a college, the financial lifeline is tuition and philanthropy, but in Toledo's case, it's really tuition. And so we then went to Cleveland, and we affiliated with the Indians and the Cavaliers. And then LeBron James came back, and that was even stronger because of our relationship with the Cavaliers. So that was another step in my career. So by the time I was asked to look at the job I have now, I had evolved as a young a young person with no experience, to a young person with fundraising experience, to somebody that gained marketing, PR, and branding experience. And then through 30 years, I was a much different professional. And when I asked the search committee for the Children's Foundation, at the time it was the Children's Hospital of Michigan Foundation, what they were looking for, they indicated that it was all of that experience that they were most interested in, because what they had been doing is just the development side. But they needed a brand, they needed to market themselves because they were a different organization because of the fact that Children's Hospital became a for-profit institution. So that's a long-winded, very long-winded answer to your question, but it really, I have seen the profession evolve. And I would say now to a young person, boy, take a look at becoming an executive in the nonprofit world. It's not unprofessional. It's just nonprofit. It's still a business.
It's still a business.
And the opportunities financially, career-wise, as I said, are endless.
So you were able to, if I'm getting this right, you're able to bring experiences from education, all of it together with branding, marketing, to me is relationship development. That seems to me to be your superhuman skill with politicians, bringing all these people together to help advance your goal, which was enrollment, all through the use of leveraging relationships and bringing people in to a project that you're passionate about. You come back to Detroit to run, and they hire you to be the president and CEO of the Children's Foundation. You go through this massive transition, which you just referenced. And now let's call it 6 years later, this is the premier foundation, in my opinion, in the state, focused on helping other foundations. Talk a little bit about that transition. How were you able to think about, how do we bring other foundations and other charities under this umbrella so that we can all advance under one mission, which is helping children?
Great question. So when I was hired, the foundation was struggling. They went for 5 years. They had $90 million, but they were very restricted on what they could do with Children's Hospital. And they weren't quite sure what to do. So they hired me. So I had a vision of why I took this job. I felt they were ready, they meaning the board, for transformational change. And at that stage of my career, that's what I was looking for. So I had an idea what they needed, but I don't own it. I didn't buy it. So I had to verify it. So I hired a couple people. I engaged Jill Nelson, one of my best employees ever, and we did a quick sort of feasibility study. We interviewed board members, employees, donors, doctors, and it verified what I thought, that this organization was lacking a strategy, lacking a brand, lacking direction. We had a disengaged staff and mostly disengaged board. They all were recruited, the board members, to be part of a hospital. They weren't anymore. So we did that. So I said to myself, okay, it's not just Larry's idea, it's what you folks said. So the next step we did, again with Jill and some other help from, in this case it was Cleveland because that's who I knew, we did a brand platform. We created 5 focus areas. We said, we're independent. We're not part of a hospital. We're not part of a university. So let's embrace that and take advantage of it. So we strategically started on a path to become a community foundation for children and now families. And so, okay, what does that mean? Well, we had 5 focus areas. 4 of the 5 were about what we now call social determinants of health, keeping people healthy. When you work for a hospital, you are really trying to help people that are sick who are in the hospital. Well, we weren't a hospital, so we're trying to help people stay healthy, particularly kids. So we now have 6 focus areas. The most recent one we added is youth development. And I can talk a little bit about that later if you want. So the next thing we did is we needed space. We were in a terrible space down at the DMC, leaky roofs, you know, it was depressing actually. So the board gave me permission to go look. Greg Bokart, our friend from Leaders for Kids, was our real estate agent. Greg found us a great space in the Fisher Building. Fisher Building was becoming sort of reborn. Peter Cummings and the platform had purchased it, and so we moved to the Fisher Building. Now it had our own space. We created a new logo. And then someone said, well, why don't you change your name? Because the name was Children's Hospital of Michigan. Everywhere I went, my mom, my friends, anybody I met, they said, how's the hospital? Of course they would, but we weren't part of the hospital. But I said this would be 2017. This is the first year I was there. I said, we're not ready to change our name. We're making so many changes. We just got to be strategically careful. That will come more naturally because we did all these other things. And I didn't want Children's Hospital to feel we were going to sort of leave them by the wayside because that we still grant them a lot of money where we can. So we did that. So the next thing we needed to do is to say, okay, we have these 5 focus areas, things like nutrition and wellness, things like safety, things like mental health, which is probably now our most important focus area. And then pediatric research, because we have a lot of research funding that we provide to Central Michigan, Wayne State, U of M, and some other places. So we needed to act like a community foundation. We had 4 partners. I was fortunate enough to have Dave Coulter. He worked for me. He left. I don't know what happened to him, but no, he's now the county executive.
Public servant.
So Dave and I hit the road.
Yeah.
We started meeting with nonprofits, and we started saying, what do you need? We think that you fit into our focus area for mental health. What do you need? Versus, here's what we want to support. I hope it fits into. So my strategy was, I got to listen. What do you need? So Dave and I started doing that in 2017, 2018, and we started granting money to more and more organizations.
With the blessing of the board? Or
This was the most supportive board in 40 years that I've ever worked for.
So in my experience, charities are all about money in, right? And money in and then work on the programs that they care about. You took a different approach, which has been incredible to see what you guys have done the last 5 or 6 years with granting more than $75 million to some of these organizations. You started in Metro Detroit, you're working through the state, and now you're starting to think about outside of Michigan throughout the country.
Right.
I mean, this is a big task.
Right. It's a very big task.
And you've got 140 partners as of today.
160.
So you grew it
We
from
keep adding them.
You
Yeah.
grew it from 4, right? So, I mean, it's an incredible thing to think about the support and the back end. I tell people all the time, you know, what you guys do is God's work, because when a family's going through a tragedy or some type of situation, their only interest is helping other families.
Right.
The last thing they want to think about is it administrative work and,
Right.
you know, putting their time and effort into things that are almost too complicated for them to figure out
Right.
at times.
Yeah. So that's a great point. So fast forward, Dave and I started with 4. We have 160 now.
Amazing.
But we also raise money. So a lot of foundations, private foundations, don't raise money. We're a public foundation. So we're challenged with raising money. My theory was and is that as we build our brand, as we educate people on, if you give money to us, we will make sure that we will listen to your interests as a donor. You're a perfect example because you're now a major donor. We will listen to what you want to do, and then we will allocate funding to those things. We have a great grant team. They do the research. If you said, hey, Larry, I want to support an autism organization in Macomb County, let me know the best ones. We can do that. So that was my theory, that the more we do that and give out money, the more it will open doors for us to raise money. Then the next thing we thought of, and was what you're alluding to, is, okay, we do some things pretty well. We do accounting, investment, and gift processing, that if you're a private citizen, you don't want to do that. You might have a passion for something, but you want to have that passion be what you work on, not the back room. We do the back room. Mm-hmm. So we started approaching individuals saying, and I'll give you the best example. Ken and Lisa Daniels, they tragically lost their son, Jamie, to an opioid overdose. They were thinking about starting their own 501c3. And I had an opportunity to meet them with Matt Friedman, our chairman at the time. And it was clear that it was Ken Daniels. It was clear that he really didn't know what that meant. It was clear what he wanted to do. So I said, Ken, let us create it and run it. You can go out and be an ambassador for Jamie and his legacy and the money. That's what we did. 3 years later, we've raised $1.5 million. The Jamie Daniels Foundation has their own brand, their own board. But Ken and Lisa don't have to do the auditing and all the 990s. We do the branding with them. We now have an executive director in Chris Perry. And so that's a great example of the things that we're doing, these affiliate organizations. We also are going to people like you, Derek, and saying, I know you have a number of interests. You're raising money. You just helped raise $80,000 through one of your events. Let us manage that. And then you and I and others figure out what you want that money to go toward, as long as it fits into our parameter, which is very broad now. You know, I always say now, families, when you're part of a hospital, children's hospital, you're pretty much stopping at 18. Mm-hmm. Well, we're not part of a hospital. So we've broadened it to college and then beyond college. And then I said, what makes a healthy child, mentally and physically? A healthy family. So if mom and dad are struggling with something, then we got to help them too. Because the family structure, as we all learn and know, is critical to the development of a child turning into a productive, healthy adult. So now I always say families and young adults and kids. And so the affiliate part of what we're doing and donor advised funds and donor funds is a big part of our strategy to grow, not only in our impact, but also in our financial stability. So.
Well, congratulations on everything that you're doing with the foundation. We got a little bit of your background, who you are, what you're focused on. What would you say is the most exciting thing that you're working on today with the foundation as you look forward?
I think it's the strategic opportunity to grow with these affiliates. And when I say affiliates, I mean family foundations, individual restricted funds like you have. We now own the First Tee Greater Detroit franchise, if you will. That's a separate organization under our umbrella, separate board. And I see us doing that in more of Michigan, but we now have a presence in Ohio, primarily Northwest Ohio. We now have a presence in South Florida. Because we're in the recovery and addiction arena, Florida is a very opportune place to do that. And we have a great relationship with a foundation known as the Hanley Foundation. So what excites me about where we're going is the ability to be so impactful locally, regionally, and as you alluded to, nationally. You know, I dream sometimes when I see organizations like St. Jude and some of these national brands that all started in St. Jude, for example, I believe it started in one hospital.
Right.
And Danny Thomas made it, and now his daughter and others have made it an international thing. And so that's a little Pollyannish to think about, you know, but
you got to dream big, right?
You got to dream big. We started with 4. We have 160. We had one affiliate that was Leaders for Kids, which we love, and it's growing. Now we have a half dozen or so. So that excites me more than anything.
That's awesome. I do want to transition and ask you a few questions to help those that are, you know, dialing in, watching, about building confidence through the art of networking and relationship development. You've alluded to it now with the program that you've created, the affiliate, and bringing in other foundations. But you once told me, you know, my goal with relationship development is to help turn 1 + 1 + 1 into 3. And how have you been able to, how would you define that for us?
Well, that's a great question too. And so what I mean by that is to look at how you can integrate a relationship and listen to what an individual needs and determine how you can help that individual get that, and then how that impacts what you need, in my case, the foundation. So the 1 + 1, it doesn't equal 2. It equals 3, because we're coming up with something that not only helps you, helps me, but because of that, it's helping someone else.
So you start with listening.
Listening is the most, I said it earlier, we're a foundation. I want to be known as a foundation that listens to what you need. You know, this is not really critical. It's just my experience. So many foundations, so many companies say, well, here are our guidelines. Here it is. I hope you fit into it. I don't do that. I say, okay, well, what do you do? What do you need? And how can we help you? If there isn't a fit, I don't say, well, there's not a fit, so good luck to you. I try to figure out how I can help you anyway. It may not be with a grant. It might be an introduction. It might be through a sponsorship of some kind. And so that listening part and really trying to determine how can I impact this individual in a positive way. If you do that consistently, I'm convinced it will only enhance your success in developing relationships.
I think that's the most critical part in developing relationships, is the critical skill of just listening. And I tell people all the time, if you just listen to people and ask engaging questions, they will tell you all of their pain points. They will tell you where they're headed. And then you talk about adding value. Introductions, to me, is the most important way that we can ever add value to people. When they're telling you what their pain points are, what they're actively looking for, and where they're going, your ability to make a qualified introduction. How often are you making those introductions for people? Is it by email? Is it in person? Are you taking people to breakfast or lunch? I mean, making introductions is a full-time job for you. I can imagine you do it 4 or 5 times a day. I mean, it's a daily thing, right?
It is, and it's multifaceted. So it could be connecting somebody via email. I do that, if not every day, every week. It may be setting up, as you mentioned, a breakfast or a lunch. I do that all the time. Maybe a phone call. But I also have a rule, sort of a Larry Burns rule, that I'll talk to anybody. And because we now have 160 grantees and partners, and we get the word out so well, more and more people are calling me. And I pride myself to listen. And, sometimes I'll have a conversation thinking, well, I don't think this is going to, lead anywhere. And then lo and behold, if you listen well enough and you really are trying, you can sometimes, if not many times, be surprised of how it is much better than what you think. And that wouldn't happen, Derek, if I said, well, I'm sorry, I don't think there's a reason to have a meeting. I might think that, but I don't do that. I always say, okay, sure. And I think that's key. It takes energy, it takes time, it takes passion to do that. I get very disappointed in myself if I forget like an email or I say I'm going to do something and I don't do it. The follow-up is so critical. And I learned that back when I worked for these executives at the United Foundation. They demanded the follow-up. That's why I do minutes for almost every meeting we have. We do an agenda because it's the follow-up that makes a difference. That's the same way with networking. If you say you're going to do something, and you're a pro at this, you'll say, Larry, and you've done this, let me introduce you to these three people. Lo and behold, within a week, you've done that. My promise to you is I'll follow up. If you take the time and your human capital, meaning your relationship, to do that, it's my responsibility to follow up with them. And so many people don't always do that. And to me, if you consistently do it day after day after day, then the networking and the relationships will just serve you so very well.
So that's the rule, the Larry Burns rule, is you'll talk to anybody. Do you have a rule for after you follow up with people? I mean, sometimes people waste time. Sometimes people take us in the wrong direction. They try to take us down their path, and it is not aligned with what our goals are.
Right.
How do you redirect the ship, and what kind of advice do you have for others that are, I'd say, emerging leaders, maybe philanthropic leaders that are, sometimes they get caught in the web of wasting time with people? How are you able to do it so concisely and precisely? Is it 15-minute windows that you give to people? Are you doing 3-4 calls a day? How do you arrange it?
Well, I do it based on the situation, but I always try to have a mindset. Try to put yourself in that person's space. And if you do that, then you understand why they keep calling you, or you understand what they need, and they will inherently know that and trust you more and believe in you, even if what you tell them is not the most positive thing. So you don't want to mislead people. You don't want to not follow up. You want to say, okay, why is Derek calling me, and what can I do? What can I do to try to get him what he needs? Versus the human nature thing is, what do I need? And how can Derek help me? And so that my advice to a young person is always try to put yourself in that person's position. It's also a great rule in interpersonal relationships with your friends, your wife, your husband, your partner, is why is she acting that way? If you look at it just from your eyes, you see something. But if you look at it from someone else's eyes, you might understand why they are acting the way they are. And I think that human nature is to sort of just worry about yourself.
Think about our own deal, what we're focused on. Right.
But if you can train yourself to, be understanding of why people do the things they do, particularly with behavior that you don't particularly like. Why is he acting that way? Well, there's probably a reason. Probably something happened a long time ago, and that's all about listening and trying to understand personal relationships, but also business relationships. How does somebody, how are they gauged for their success? And it might be because they need to get a grant from the Children's Foundation. That's going to impact their life. Well, if I really try to work on something that they get what they need, even if it's not a grant, it's direction, it's something positive, then they'll go away saying good things, and word of mouth is so important.
Word of mouth is everything. I mean, you've created 160 partners that are all word of mouth now,
right.
which is awesome. I do want to ask a couple questions specific to networking because I do consider you a master at relational development. So how would you define networking?
Networking is just, trying to build your portfolio of relationships in a community for professional purposes, but also for personal, and then those connect. You and I first met professionally, but we're friends now. And that's a 1 + 1 = 4.
Yes.
And I think it's taking the time, the energy, and being yourself. I don't consider myself a great sort of glad-hander of, just going around. Some people are marvelous at that.
Politicians specifically
marvelous,
are really good at it, right?
But some of them, and I experience this sometimes on Mackinac.
Yep.
They're looking the other way when they shake your hand. I don't want to be that guy.
Right.
And so being sincere, following up, I want to be known as the person who, he does what he says he's going to do, and he's sincere about it. Versus, he knows everybody. I mean, if you do the first two things, you're probably going to know a lot of people anyway. So it really is developing those relationships based on listening and caring about the other person as much as you can in a 3-minute conversation.
And most of these conversations are 3 minutes or less,
Yes.
especially when you're talking about the Mackinac Policy Conference or other conferences that you're associated with. How do you organize your contacts? I mean, I know there's very intuitive CRM systems out there. I don't want to get into detail about that. But mentally, I mean, do you think touch points are important? Are you do you have a way of notifying yourself, every 3 months I want to make sure I reach out to this person because they mean X to me? How do you manage that?
Well, I could probably do a better job at that.
I think we all could.
You do a great job at that. Your phone calls at the end of the year. You do that in a masterful way. And so what I try to do is to keep notes and records of what I promised to do. And then when I see somebody, I always try to make an effort to say hello. If I see him at the airport, or if I see him at a restaurant, or see him at a ball game, I always try to make a note. And the other thing I do is I always say my name. Because when you see someone out of context that you haven't seen in a while,
it's helpful.
Sometimes I know them, I just can't remember their name because I hadn't thought about it. So what I do is always say, hi, Larry Burns. And a lot of times, well, I know who you are. But a lot of times, it helps them. And what they usually do is they say their name,
which is helpful to you.
So if you're struggling with somebody's name, and you say, "Hey, Larry Burns," said, "Oh yeah, Derek Dickow." So that's just a little technique I use. But I could do a better job of systematically following up. But what I do every Sunday, every Monday, is look at my week, look at the past week, make sure I followed up on all my emails.
All the texts got responded to.
Like you, I get about, 350 emails a day. And at least half, if not more, are clothing stores, food, whatever. So you just delete those or, read them and stuff like that. But a lot of them are things that you need to respond. One of my pet peeves, and anybody that works with me knows this, is that, you send an email and did he get it? Did he, And so what I always try to do is say, thanks, I'm on it.
Acknowledge.
I'll read it. And they know that I got it and that I care enough to respond, because human nature, to me at least, if I send you an email, particularly if I'm asking for something and you don't respond, my immediate thought is you don't care. Or you didn't get it.
Acknowledge receipt. That's it, right? Every
Say
time.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Even I kid with my team saying, well, even if you want to say, leave me alone or whatever, at least I know you got it.
I'll pass at this time. Right. Just let us know.
And so I think that's important.
So tactically at events, and you attend, you see thousands of people at events that you attend. So the name, remembering their name is important. That's a good strategy to lead with your name to help them remember, even though they may know who you are. That's a good one. Another thing that I've witnessed that you do exceptionally well, and something that I actually have borrowed from you, Mr. Larry Burns, is inside of my pocket, I have my notepad, and I know that Larry has one too.
I do.
And so we are he has a fancy leather-bound case.
I have my name on it, my number, so I can give you a card.
I got my name on mine. I got my pen. I don't carry cards. I know it's a practice of your business and from your rich history and the people that mentored you.
Because I'm old.
And no, that's not what I meant. I meant because you come from an era where presenting someone with a card is important, and I respect that. I love the note-taking idea at events, because I think if you have, and we have seen this done by others, and certainly have done this ourselves, is we pull out our phone. There could be some people around us. We're down, focused on our phone, which means we're not present in the conversation. Right. And not only is that, in many cases rude, it also demonstrates to people that you think something else is more important than their time.
Or if I say, Derek, I'll call you. Well, I better write that down because I might forget.
I will forget. So I have to write it down. And I used to, in the early stages of my networking career, make notes. So when we have emails that we could send ourselves. But the habit of writing things, I have found, has been tremendously helpful to me. So thank you for sharing that with me.
And I put them on, and it drives Judy kind of crazy, because I'll leave my notes in the kitchen, and until I do what I said I'm going to do, that note
they stay there. Yeah.
And it's bothering her, and it bothers me, but it's really kind of relieving when I get to throw it away, because that means I've done it.
The task has been completed. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that with me. It is a practice that is forever burned into my daily practice. I do it. It's the Larry Burns method.
Well, good.
That is another one of the Larry. So I want to ask you a couple more questions. I know your time is limited today. We talked about the value that you bring to people is, number one, listening, which is the most important. And then you make an introduction, which I believe to be the most important way that we can add value to people, by actually making connections of qualified people. I do want to ask on the art of giving, and why is it that people give to particular organizations? I mean, there's so many. I once read that there's 70,000 nonprofits registered in the state of Michigan. Now, maybe it's, the 80-20 rule, right? The top 20% drive all the activity and actually help people and raise all the money. So how are you able to cut through the noise of so much other? There's only so much of the pie.
Right.
And, you're going to the same organizations, and they all have big budgets, and they all have their names everywhere, like the Tigers and Red Wings. And then the manufacturing would be another. But how do you get to the art of giving with people? I mean, how are you able to cut through that?
Well, by doing impactful things, trying to obtain as much data as you can of the impact you're making after you've been around for a while, and then being extremely organized in your presentation. People always say people give to people. And I agree with that. But I think it's evolved over time. So people give to people, but particularly your generation and younger, are giving to things they have passion for, and they want almost immediate proof that you're making a difference. You know, when the United Way was as robust as it was, you gave money and they gave it out, and you kind of had confidence that they were doing the right thing. And then donor designations came in, started in California, and now dominate, you know, in the country with United Ways. The reason that is because I want to give money to something specific. You can handle it, but you need to prove to me over time that it's really working. And if it's not working, you have to prove to me that you're going to pivot and you know, and try something else. And so what we try to do is it's one of the reasons we invest so much in social media and in communications. Some people call it marketing. I think it's more communications, because now that we have, you know, we're giving out $7 million a year, but we're also raising money. We need to really do a good job indicating the impact we're having. And, you know, we've done that with the pandemic. We're trying to do that, particularly in mental health. And so cutting through a lot of what you refer to is really just being very strategic, business-like in how you operate and how you communicate what you're doing.
So to help build confidence with the donor, your focus on the impact, case studies. This is how we spend the money. These are the programs that and then you're constantly communicating. I get your newsletter that you print.
Newsletters, social media, and I'm very active myself on behalf of myself and the foundation. Jill and her team do a marvelous job with, you know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. It amazes me how many senior executives in nonprofits don't do any of that.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you are everywhere. I mean, I open my phone, any of my apps, there's a picture of Larry doing something on behalf of the foundation.
Some people, you know, will say, well, that's self-promotion. Well, a little bit of it is, but I'm promoting not myself on behalf of the foundation or what I'm doing. So just recently, the University of Michigan hired a new president, Santa Ono. I knew him when he was at Cincinnati. I was at the University of Toledo. He is extremely active on social media. And what that does is it engages his students. They love him because he's a guy. And, you know, there's so many presidents and that, you know, people always ask me, who does your social media?
You do it.
I do it. Now, Jill and her team do their own stuff, but, you know, they are great at that. But I feel I need to, it's part of my brand. It's part of my job. And I think that that's an important message to get out to your donors that, you know, I used to say, I want people to say, you're everywhere. Because if they say that, then I think I'm doing my job trying to be everywhere I can be.
Oh, you're definitely doing your job, Larry. I don't know anybody. You must have 2-3 pairs of shoes in your trunk at any given time.
I love shoes.
Yes, we both do.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the other thing that, you know, before I leave, I particularly for young people, and I used to be a professor at the University of Toledo, and I taught a lot about personal branding. And I actually love doing a presentation called The Power of You, and it's about personal branding. Make sure you stop and think about your personal brand. How do you want to be perceived? If you want to be perceived as the guy who wears your baseball cap backwards and, you know, and shirt tail out, if that's what you want, well, then go for it. But, and this would be to college students. But remember, first impressions last a long time, and you only get one chance. You know, it's sort of old school. You only get one chance to make a first. So think about your brand. How do you want to be perceived? And as I mentioned when we began, Clay Howell was my mentor in and creating this personal brand. And then my wife bought me a bow tie, started wearing them on Fridays.
Looks great.
So students said, well, on Thursday, well, where's your bow tie? So I made it sort of my brand. And people may not know my name, but they'll kind of know the bow tie guy.
I know the bow tie.
And so just make sure that you think about and you develop your own strategy for your brand. Don't let it just be whatever happens. And a lot of that is you can make particularly in today's world, if you dress up even a little bit, you'll stand out because most people don't. And it will only enhance your brand.
Your brand. And your brand is everything.
And don't let anybody tease you about it or, say, I once had it when I was like 30, once had a guy that I worked with says, who are you trying to be? And it's, and he was trying to discourage me from my personal brand. And at that time I had enough confidence and I liked it enough but if I didn't, I might've said, oh, well, I better not do that. And so just develop your own brand, stick with it, and don't let anyone tell you that it's wrong because it's you.
Be authentically you. I think that's something that you definitely embody and are a good role model and example. A couple final questions. I once read in terms of people giving money and giving support, whether it's philanthropically or politically, it comes down to three categories. One, they give from their heart.
Mm-hmm.
So you make your case,
right? You
have your passion and your mission, and they give, here's my check. I believe I want to help. The second reason they give is they may have some future ask, or they may need something.
Right.
So I'm going to support you today because I know that I'm coming back. And then the third reason that people give is leveraging relational capital. So based on who asked them.
Right.
So could you comment on that and give us a little bit more insight on the three reasons that people give from those three different perspectives?
The first one is evolving. So, giving from the heart.
From the heart.
And I sort of alluded to it that particularly generation younger than me, that they're giving because of some passion they have for something, versus giving and hoping that it goes to something that they care about. So that's becoming more and more important as people are focusing on what they want their money to go to. And companies are doing that now more often. That's why United Ways, I think, across the country are suffering, because companies are now saying, well, what we really care about are these two things. And if you look at, one of the best philanthropic people and companies in our town, Rocket Mortgage, they're very specific. Right now, they're very concentrating on breaking down the digital divide. People in Detroit that don't have access to phones, computers, websites, laptops. And so that's very specific. And so, so that's an example. The second one of asking, because I might ask you for something else, that's always sort of been the case. I just say be careful about that, just because you might be terribly disappointed when you do something for someone and they don't
come back.
Right. And then the third one is leveraging relationships.
Leveraging relational capital. So based on who asks, right? So maybe if I ask you for support, you might say yes. But if somebody off the street asks you, I don't,
That when I started my career was the dominating force of philanthropy in the corporate community. So when I worked at the United Foundation, 79 to 85 or so, it was what I call leverage fundraising. So I was responsible for all the accounting firms. They had the big 8 back then. I was responsible for law firms. I was responsible for, at one point, banks and Tier 1 automotive. So guess what my strategy was in each one of those cases?
So your best advice to someone that is joining a committee or a board that they're passionate about the organization, how do they best leverage their network to support the charity that they
Yeah.
care so deeply, because they're investing time and money?
Right. So in my example, what always happened was we'd find out who the biggest client was, and we'd have that person ask for the money. And it usually worked. But if that relationship changed, then you're left with kind of nothing. So the leverage fundraising works as long as you have the leverage. But leverage goes away. So my advice is make sure that the relationship you're building is one that will last because of the interest or the passion the individual has to give you the money. And some of the examples I can use in my career is that in higher ed, you're always trying to raise endowment money and money from people. And a lot of times, an individual will give you or promise to give you money with a motive to get something major in return. Business, their kid in school, or something.
Name on a building.
Right. And so I've walked away from those situations when I felt that there was no real charitable intent.
Wow, you have.
I have. Because I've inherited relationships where there was no real charitable intent, and the person is unhappy because they didn't get what they wanted. And I mean, it even happened when I started this job. And so I always say, if I have a gut feeling you're giving money to me only because what you want, I want to walk away from that, because sooner or later it will
become transactional.
Yeah, and it won't work. Now, you could have an interest and want something. That's a little different. But
that's harmony,
yeah,
right?
That's harmony.
It works.
So, but there are some people that will never walk away from a big gift because that's how they're judged. And so, as a manager, as a leader, I'm not going to judge my employees on how much money they raise as much as the relationships they're building. Just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean that I deserve any of it. You know, I have to prove to you that what we do is of interest to you. And if you also get something in return for that, well, that's great. But you gotta be charitable.
That brings me to a quote that I just heard a few days ago. It was, give without remembering and receive without forgetting.
Yeah. Being grateful.
Being grateful. And that's, I think, what has elevated your career, is giving without any expectation of anything in return. And you just do good work, and you explain to people what your program is, give them the confidence they need to support your mission. And I think, based on the way you listen and follow up, I think that's led you to your success.
Well, that's a big part of it. It's certainly not my intelligence or any other talent I have. Sure. But and the best part of all that, I would tell students when I was teaching, is that there are certain things that you can control. You can control your brand. You can control how you act. You can control your follow-up. I mean, you can't control your family, you know, where you were born. Some, you know, and people have issues with their family and, you know, where they came from. And you know, like, nothing you can do about that. Some, you know, I always say I want to be a great golfer. That ain't going to happen. But I can be a really good executive because I can learn how to do that. And so even if you write things down, okay, what do I have complete control over? What a great game plan to have a successful career in life.
I think you certainly have had a wonderful and successful career. The part of your career I admire the most is your willingness to mentor and to support others along their journey at whatever stage they're at, because people come to you at a young age and people come to you a little more seasoned. In your example that you said is incredible. I appreciate everything that you've given to me. And I hope this has been a healthy dialogue for you to help build some confidence as you build connections and relationships with people in your career. I hope this has been helpful for you to understand how to listen more, how to learn from people, provide the value that they're looking for. With Larry Burns, President and CEO of the Children's Foundation, my friend, my mentor. I appreciate you so much, Larry.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for listening to the Power Connector podcast. Follow along at DerekDickow.com for more, and we'll see you soon.